What's up, Blue Jays Nation? Welcome back to the channel. And folks, do I have some absolutely wild news to break down for you today? The New York Mets have struck again. And this time their latest move has some serious implications for what the Toronto Blue Jays can and cannot do moving forward. We're talking about a blockbuster trade that went down involving one of the best pitchers in baseball. We're going to dive deep into what the Blue Jays could have done, but didn't do. And then I'm going to blow your mind with some facts about Alejandro Kirk that you probably forgot about or maybe never even knew in the first place. Trust me, by the time we're done here, you're going to understand why Kirk might be the most underrated weapon in the Blue Jays arsenal, and why missing out on this latest trade might actually hurt more than you think. But before we dive into all of this madness, I need you to do me a favor. If you're fired up about Blue Jays baseball, if you're ready for spring training, if you want to stay on top of every single move Ross Atkins makes or doesn't make, go ahead and smash that subscribe button right now. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a video because we've got content dropping constantly as we head toward opening day. Now let's get into this. Absolute chaos because the offseason just got a whole lot more interesting. So here's what happened. And I want you to really understand the magnitude of this move. The New York Mets, who apparently decided that the offseason doesn't really start until mid-January, because why would you make moves when everyone else is making moves, right? They just went out and traded for Freddy Peralta from the Milwaukee Brewers. And when I say Freddy Peralta, I'm not talking about some back-of-the-rotation guy or a project pitcher. I'm talking about a legitimate ace, a two-time All-Star, a guy who just put up a 2.7 ERA last year with a ridiculous 5.5 wins above replacement. We're talking about 17 wins against only 6 losses. This man was absolutely dealing for the Brewers. And now he's heading to Queens to join an already stacked Mets rotation. Let's break down just how good Freddy Peralta actually is, because I think some people might be sleeping on this. Last season, Peralta threw 176 innings, which shows you he's durable, he's reliable, he's not some 60-inning reliever who had a hot stretch. This is a workhorse starter who eats innings and dominates hitters while doing it. His WHIP, which is walks plus hits per inning pitched for those who might not be familiar, was at a career low. We're talking about a guy who is essentially giving up just over 1 bases per inning. That's elite territory, folks. That's A's level stuff. The only other time in his career he had a WHIP that low was during the shortened COVID season, when he only threw 78 innings. Okay, so you could argue that was a small sample size. But last year, that was the real deal over a full season's worth of work. Peralta's pitching repertoire is absolutely filthy. We're talking multiple plus pitches, the ability to miss bats at an elite rate, and the kind of consistency that makes him a nightmare matchup for opposing lineups. He's been doing this for multiple years now, not just one fluke season. 176 innings last year, similar workloads in the years before that. This is a guy you can pencil in for 30-plus starts, 200 innings, and an ERA somewhere in the low threes. That's exactly what contending teams are looking for. And the Mets just went out and got him. Now here's where it gets really interesting. And this is where Blue Jays fans need to pay attention. What did the Mets have to give up to get this Excalibur arm? They sent their 3rd and 6th ranked prospects to Milwaukee. The headliners were Jet Williams, who's an infielder that a lot of people were excited about in the Mets system, and Brandon Sproat, who's a pitcher. These were the Mets' 3rd and 6th best prospects. Good players for sure, but not untouchable franchise cornerstones. And here's the kicker that should have every Blue Jays fan wondering what could have been. The Blue Jays absolutely could have made this trade. Let me explain the math here because it's actually fascinating. To put this in Blue Jays terms, trading your 3rd and 6th ranked prospects would be the equivalent of dealing Arjun Nimmala and Gage Staniford. Now Nimmala is the Blue Jays' 3rd ranked prospect right now, a talented young player with a lot of upside. Staniford is ranked 6th in the system, and from everything we're hearing, this kid has been absolutely crushing it in the minor leagues. People around the organization are genuinely excited about what he could do. If he gets some innings at the major league level this spring, his stuff is reportedly electric. The kind of arm that could develop into something special. So the question becomes, would you trade Nimmala and Staniford for Freddy Peralta? And here's where the debate gets really spicy. On one hand, you're giving up 2 high-upside prospects who could potentially be impact major leaguers down the road. On the other hand, you're getting a proven ace right now. A guy who can slot into your rotation immediately and give you legitimate top-of-the-rotation production. For a team like the Blue Jays that's trying to win now, that's trying to maximize the window with Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and Bo Bichette still on the roster. That kind of move makes a ton of sense. The evaluations suggest that Jet Williams is probably a slightly better prospect than Nimmala in terms of how close he is to Major League ready. But the overall quality of the trade package would have been very similar if the Blue Jays had made this deal instead of the Mets. This was absolutely a winnable trade for Toronto. They had the prospect capital. They had the organizational depth. They could have done this deal if they wanted to, so why didn't they? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The argument against making this move would be, do the Blue Jays really need another starting pitcher right now? Let's look at their current rotation. You've got Kevin Gausman, who's been one of the most consistent arms in baseball. You've got Jose Berrios, who's solid and reliable. You've got Bowden Francis, who emerged as a genuine weapon last year. You've got Chris Bassett when healthy. And you've got other options like Uriel Rodriguez and potentially others competing for spots. So you could argue that the Blue Jays already have 5 really good names in their rotation, and adding Peralta would be pushing all your chips into the middle of the table on pitching. But maybe you need to address other areas of the roster. But here's my counterargument. And I want you to really think about this. When you have the opportunity to add an ace, a legitimate #1 starter who can dominate games and give you a chance to win every 5th day, you don't say no because you already have enough good pitchers. You say yes and you figure out the rest later. Look at what the Dodgers do every single year. They stockpile elite starting pitching because you can never have too much of it. Injuries happen. Performance fluctuates. Arms get tired over the course of a long season. Having 6 or 7 guys who could legitimately start games for you isn't a problem, it's a luxury. It's depth. It's insurance. It's what championship teams do. Imagine for a second what the Blue Jays rotation would look like with Freddy Peralta in it. You're talking about Gausman and Peralta at the top? 2 guys who can absolutely shut down opposing lineups on any given night? Then you've got Berrios, Francis, and whoever else fills out the back end. That's a rotation that can go toe-to-toe with anybody in the American League. That's a rotation that wins playoff series. That's a rotation that gives you a legitimate shot at making a deep October run. And you could have had it for 2 prospects who, let's be honest, might never even become productive major leaguers. The success rate for prospects is notoriously low. Most of them don't pan out. So when you can trade uncertainty for certainty for proven production, you usually should. Now here's a fun Blue Jays connection that you absolutely need to know about. And this is the kind of baseball trivia that makes you appreciate how interconnected everything in this sport really is. Do you know how the Milwaukee Brewers originally acquired Freddy Peralta? This is wild. Way back in the early part of his career, Peralta was actually with the Seattle Mariners organization. And the Brewers traded for him in a 3-person deal. Want to know who they gave up to get him? None other than Adam Lind. Yes, that Adam Lind, the former Blue Jays first baseman and designated hitter, the Silver Slugger winner, who absolutely mashed left-handed pitching and was a fan favorite in Toronto for years. So in a roundabout way, the Blue Jays are technically responsible for Freddy Peralta becoming the pitcher he is today, and for the Brewers just getting a massive prospect haul from the Mets. If Toronto had never developed Adam Lind, if Lind had never become the player he was, if the Brewers had never traded for him and then flipped him in a deal that brought back Peralta, none of this happens. It's one of those 6 degrees of separation things that makes baseball so fascinating. Everything connects to everything else in ways you don't always see at first glance. Adam Lind was such a fun player to watch during his Blue Jays years. The guy could absolutely demolish right-handed pitching. He had that sweet left-handed swing, that power to all fields. And he just kept dropping dingers year after year, even after his Toronto career ended. He went on to have productive seasons with other teams, remaining a legitimate threat at the plate well into his 30s. And now, years later, a trade that involved him has resulted in the Brewers getting a king's ransom in prospects from the Mets. Baseball is funny like that, so what does all of this mean for the Brewers moving forward? That's another interesting question. Peralta was arguably their ace, the guy they could count on to give them quality starts and anchor the rotation. Now he's gone, And they've got a bunch of new prospects to develop. Are they going to lean more heavily on guys like Corbin Burnes? Oh wait, he's gone too. Freddy Peralta might have been their best starter at this point, so losing him is significant. They're clearly in some kind of transition phase, trying to get younger, trying to restock the farm system. It's a smart move for them long term, but it does make you wonder what their 2026 season is going to look like. Probably not great. But the Brewers have a track record of developing talent and staying competitive even when you don't expect them to, so never count them out completely. But let's bring this back to the Blue Jays, because that's what we're all here for. Right now, according to multiple MLB insiders, the Blue Jays are apparently sniffing around the trade market. The key word that keeps coming up is active. Toronto is actively looking for ways to improve the roster, actively trying to acquire those last pieces of the puzzle that could take them from playoff contender to legitimate World Series threat. Who exactly they're attached to remains somewhat murky. There haven't been a ton of concrete reports linking them to specific players, but the fact that they're out there working the phones, having conversations, exploring options, that's encouraging. Some of the rumors floating around are absolutely wild. There's been talk about Mason Miller, the electric closer from the Athletics, potentially being available. Now that would be a massive get. A legitimate shutdown arm at the back end of the bullpen who could turn every game into a 7 or a 10-inning contest. If you've got Miller closing games with Jordan Romano and other high-leverage arms setting him up, that's a bullpen that can compete with anybody. But Miller isn't going to come cheap. The Athletics would want a significant return, probably multiple high-level prospects. And you have to decide if you're willing to pay that price. Then there's the Corbin Burnes rumor, which honestly sounds a little too good to be true. Burnes is one of the absolute best pitchers in baseball, a former Cy Young Award winner. A guy who can completely dominate games. But he's also going to be a free agent after this season, which means you'd be trading significant assets for 1 year of team control unless you can extend him. And reportedly, Burnes is looking for something like a 10-year deal, which sounds absolutely insane for a pitcher who's already in his 30s. 10 years? For a pitcher? That's the kind of contract that almost always ends badly. You're paying for past performance and hoping the decline doesn't happen too quickly, but Father Time is undefeated. Pitchers break down, arms wear out. Giving someone a 10-year deal at that position is terrifying. So while a Corbin Burnes trade would be exciting in theory, the practical realities make it really difficult to envision. You'd have to give up a ton of prospects. You'd only have him for 1 year unless you extend him, and extending him would require a commitment that could hamstring your franchise for the next decade. It's one of those moves where the upside is massive, but the risk is equally enormous. I'm not saying the Blue Jays shouldn't explore it, but I understand why there might be hesitation. The good news is that something seems to be coming. The Blue Jays aren't done. Ross Atkins and his front office are still working, still looking for ways to get better, still trying to find value in the market. Whether it's a starting pitcher, a reliever, a position player, or something else entirely. There's reason to believe we're going to see at least one more significant move before spring training gets into full swing. And after missing out on Freddy Peralta, after watching the Mets swoop in and grab an ace, while the Blue Jays stood on the sidelines, there's definitely some pressure to make something happen now. I promised you we'd talk about Alejandro Kirk, and folks, this is where things get really fun because I think Kirk might be the most underrated player on the entire Blue Jays roster. This man doesn't get nearly enough credit for what he brings to the table. And I'm about to remind you why he's so incredibly valuable. Let's start with some history because understanding where Kirk came from helps you appreciate where he is now. The Blue Jays haven't always been great at developing catchers. If you look back through 50 years of franchise history, the list of homegrown catchers who became genuine stars is pretty short. You've got Ernie Whitt, Pat Borders, Buck Martinez, and that's about it. Most of the successful catchers in Blue Jays history were guys they went out and acquired, like Russell Martin or Bengie Molina, or any number of veterans they signed or traded for over the years. Developing an elite catcher from within your own system is really, really hard, and Toronto historically hasn't done it very often. But then Alejandro Kirk came along, and everything changed. A few years ago, the Blue Jays had what you could legitimately call an embarrassment of riches at the catching position. They had Gabriel Moreno, who was one of the top catching prospects in all of baseball. They had Danny Jansen, a solid veteran who could handle a pitching staff and contribute offensively. And they had Kirk, this young kid who was just starting to show what he could do at the major league level. 3 legitimate catching options, all with different skill sets, all with value. That never happens. Most teams are scrambling to find one good catcher, and the Blue Jays had 3. Ultimately, the Blue Jays made the decision to trade Moreno, who went on to have success with Arizona, and Jansen eventually moved on as well. Kirk became the guy, the unquestioned starter, the captain behind the plate. And it's been a long time since Toronto has had someone seize that role and truly make it their own the way Kirk has. You'd have to go back to guys like J.P. Arencibia or maybe Russell Martin during his Blue Jays tenure to find someone who held down the catching position with that kind of consistency and production. Here's a story that should give you goosebumps if you're a Blue Jays fan. Years ago, when Kirk was still in the minor leagues playing in Bluefield, West Virginia, there was a broadcaster for the team named Zach Helton. And Helton said something that turned out to be incredibly prophetic. He said, and this is a quote, "When Kirk walks into the batter's box, you stop." It's that simple. And you know what? He was absolutely right. When Kirk came up to hit, everything in that ballpark stopped. The vendors stopped selling hot dogs. The fans stopped their conversations. The roughly 1,000 people in attendance for those minor league games all turned their attention to the batter's box because they knew something special might happen. And it did happen. Kirk would absolutely demolish baseballs at that level. There was one particular day where he hit a ball over the batter's eye and into the West Virginia wilderness. It's just an absolute moonshot that left everyone in the ballpark in AHL. Even back then, even at the lowest levels of professional baseball, you could see that Kirk had something special. The bat-to-ball skills were elite. The power was real. The baseball IQ was off the charts. This kid was going to be something special. And everyone who saw him play knew it. Fast forward to today. And Kirk is coming off an incredible 2.3 wins above replacement season where he made his second All-Star appearance. Let me hit you with some numbers that you might have forgotten or that might not have fully registered at the time. Kirk hit 282 last year. That's a legitimate batting average in an era where hitting for average is becoming increasingly rare. He drove in 76 runs. 76 RBs from the catching position. Do you understand how valuable that is? Catchers aren't supposed to be offensive engines. They're supposed to be defensive specialists who maybe give you a little bit at the plate if you're lucky. Asterisk. But Kirk gave the Blue Jays 76 RBs, which is borderline elite production from that position, and he hit 15 home runs. 15 home runs with a 282 average and 76 ribbies from your catcher is the kind of production that championship teams get from that spot in the lineup. It's the difference between being a good offensive team and being a great one. Think about all the games where Kirk came up in a big spot and delivered. Think about all the times he worked a walk to get on base ahead of the big bats in the lineup. Think about all the clutch hits, all the productive outs, all the ways he contributed beyond just the raw numbers. But here's what I love most about Kirk, and this is something that embodies the Blue Jays' organizational philosophy. The man lives and breathes putting the ball in play. He doesn't like striking out, and his strikeout numbers reflect that. Kirk has an elite understanding of the strike zone, which makes sense given that he's a catcher and has to call pitches and know what's coming. That perspective from behind the plate translates directly to his hitting approach. He knows what pitches are strikes and what pitches are balls. He knows what he can and can't handle. And he doesn't expand the zone chasing pitches. He has no chance of hitting hard. Kirk is one of the better opposite field hitters in all of baseball. He can take an outside pitch and slap it to the opposite field with authority, keeping that power regardless of where the pitch is located or which way he's hitting the ball. It's a thing of beauty to watch when he's locked in. He'll see a pitch on the outer half, he'll let it travel deep into the zone, and then he'll just flick his wrists and drive the ball to left field for extra bases. That's elite hitting. That's the kind of skill that separates good hitters from great ones. Defensively, Kirk has become an incredible catcher behind the plate as well. Early in his career, there were questions about his receiving, his framing, his ability to control the running game, but he's worked tirelessly to improve in all those areas, and the results speak for themselves. He's become a trusted presence behind the plate. Someone the pitching staff has confidence in. Someone who can handle a major league pitching staff and get the most out of every arm. His pitch framing has improved significantly. His game calling has gotten better. He's throwing out more runners attempting to steal. All the little things that make a catcher valuable. Kirk has developed and refined. What's exciting is that Kirk is still relatively young, still evolving as a player, still figuring out ways to get better. Watching him hit is genuinely a thing of beauty, the way he can just slap the ball around to all fields, the way he consistently barrels up pitches, the way he grinds out at bats and makes pitchers work. This is the kind of player you build around, the kind of player who sets the tone for your entire lineup. When your catcher is hitting 2-2 with pop and great plate discipline, everyone else in that lineup benefits. So when you step back and look at the big picture, when you consider everything the Blue Jays have going on right now, Alejandro Kirk represents one of their biggest strengths and one of the main reasons they should feel confident about their ability to compete in 2020. Having elite production from the catching position is such a massive advantage because most teams don't have it. Most teams are getting replacement-level offense from their catcher and hoping the defense makes up for it. The Blue Jays are getting genuine all-star level production from Kirk, and that's a huge edge in the standings over the course of 162 games. Now let's tie everything together, because there's a bigger narrative here that Blue Jays fans need to understand. The Mets acquiring Freddy Peralta, while not directly involving Toronto, does impact the Blue Jays situation. It takes one of the best available starting pitchers off the trade market, which means there's one fewer option for Ross Atkins to pursue if he decides the rotation needs an upgrade. It also shows what the market price is for an ace-caliber arm, roughly your third and sixth best prospects. That's the going rate, and now everyone knows it. The Blue Jays could have made that deal. They chose not to, whether because they felt the rotation was already strong enough, or because they want to preserve those prospects for a different deal, or because they have other priorities on the roster. Whatever the reason, they let the Mets step in and grab Peralta, and now they'll have to live with that decision. Maybe it was the right call. Maybe they've got something else brewing that will make everyone forget about Peralta. Or maybe in 6 months we'll all be wondering what could have been if Toronto had just pulled the trigger on that trade. The good news is that the Blue Jays still have options. The trade market is still active. There are still impact players available if you're willing to pay the price. Mason Miller could transform the bullpen. There are other starting pitchers who might become available as we get closer to spring training. There are position players who could fill needs and add depth. The offseason isn't over. And Ross Atkins has shown time and time again that he's willing to make moves to improve the roster. But the clock is ticking. Spring training is just a few weeks away. Pitchers and catchers will be reporting before you know it, and once that happens, the opportunity to make significant roster moves starts to evaporate. This is crunch time. This is when front offices have to make tough decisions about how aggressive they want to be, how much they're willing to spend or trade, what kind of risks they're willing to take. The Blue Jays are at a crossroads. They can stand pat, trust the roster they have, and hope it's good enough. Or they can make one more big move, push their chips to the middle of the table, and go all-in on trying to win now while Guerrero and Bichette are still in their prime. Which path will they choose? That's the question keeping Blue Jays fans up at night. That's the drama of this offseason. That's what makes following this team so compelling. You've got the pieces in place to compete. You've got stars like Kirk who are performing at an elite level. You've got a solid rotation, a good bullpen, position players who can contribute. But is it enough? Or do you need that one more piece, that final addition that takes you from good to great? The Mets clearly decided they needed to add Freddy Peralta to have a shot at contention. They paid the price, made the move, and now they're betting that Peralta puts them over the top. The Blue Jays watched it happen and decided to pass. Was that the right decision? We won't know until October. We won't know until we see how this all plays out, how the season unfolds, who makes the playoffs and who goes home early. But the decision has been made, and now Toronto has to live with it. Here's what I know for sure. The Blue Jays have talent. They have guys like Alejandro Kirk who can anchor your lineup and give you all-star production from a premium defensive position. They have a rotation that, when healthy, can compete with anyone. They have a lineup that can score runs. The pieces are there. The foundation is solid. Whether it's enough to win in the incredibly tough American League East, whether it's enough to survive the playoff gauntlet and make a World Series run, that remains to be seen. But I'll tell you this, don't sleep on Alejandro Kirk. Don't forget about what he brings to this team every single day. 76 RB is 15 home runs, a 2.82 average, elite defense behind the plate. And he's still getting better. That's your catcher, Blue Jays fans. That's the guy calling the game, handling the pitching staff, and contributing at an elite level offensively. Not every team has that. In fact, most teams don't have that. It's a massive competitive advantage. And it's one of the main reasons Toronto should feel good about their chances this year. The Freddy Peralta trade is done. The Mets got their ace. The Blue Jays will have to find another path to improvement. But with players like Kirk anchoring the roster, with Ross Atkins still working the phones, with a full season ahead where anything can happen, there's still plenty of reason for optimism. The offseason continues, spring training approaches, and soon enough we'll all get to see this team take the field and show us what they're really made of. Alright, Blue Jays Nation, that's everything I've got for you today. We covered the massive Freddy Peralta trade. We talked about what the Blue Jays could have done, but didn't do. We dove deep into why Alejandro Kirk is one of the most underrated players in baseball. And we set the stage for what should be a fascinating final few weeks before spring training. Now I want to hear from you in the comments below. Do you think the Blue Jays should have traded for Freddy Peralta? Would you have given up prospects like Nimala and Stanifer for an ace? What do you think Ross Atkins should do next? And are you as excited about Alejandro Kirk as I am? Let me know your thoughts. Let's get a conversation going, because this is the best time of year to debate all these possibilities. If you enjoyed this breakdown and want to stay on top of every single Blue Jays development as we head toward opening day, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. I've got tons more content coming your way, breaking down every trade rumor, every signing, every roster move, all the way through spring training and into the regular season. Drop a like on this video if you found it valuable, and share it with your fellow Blue Jays fans who need to know about this Peralta situation and why Kirk is so special. The Blue Jays are gearing up for their 50th anniversary season, and it's going to be an incredible year celebrating the history of this franchise, while trying to add another chapter to the story. Spring training is right around the corner, the excitement is building, and we're going to be here covering every single moment. Thank you so much for watching, thank you for being part of this community, and I'll see you in the next video.